sedang menunggu bimbinganmu menuju ke arah medan yang jaya. Dari milik rohani Islam, kembangkan di persada bunda. Nusa menanti dharma baktimu, membangun masyarakat Indonesia. Kembangkan daya istirahatmu dalam semua selimu. Universitas Islam Negeri, hiduplah kebersamaan-lamanya. Universitas Islam Negeri, hiduplah kebersamaan-lamanya. Kita bangkit mahasiswa, UIN harapan bangsa. Bunga sedang menunggu bimbinganmu menuju ke arah medan yang jaya. Dari milik rohani Islam, kembangkan di persada bunda. Nusa menanti dharma baktimu, membangun masyarakat Indonesia. Kembangkan daya istirahatmu dalam semua selimu. Universitas Islam Negeri, hiduplah kebersamaan-lamanya. Universitas Islam Negeri, hiduplah kebersamaan-lamanya. Kita bangkit mahasiswa, UIN harapan bangsa. Bunga sedang menunggu bimbinganmu menuju ke arah medan yang jaya. Dari milik rohani Islam, kembangkan di persada bunda. Nusa menanti dharma baktimu, membangun masyarakat Indonesia. Kembangkan daya istirahatmu dalam semua selimu. Universitas Islam Negeri, hiduplah kebersamaan-lamanya. Universitas Islam Negeri, hiduplah kebersamaan-lamanya. Kita bangkit mahasiswa, UIN harapan bangsa. Bunga sedang menunggu bimbinganmu menuju ke arah medan yang jaya. Dari milik rohani Islam, kembangkan di persada bunda. Nusa menanti dharma baktimu, membangun masyarakat Indonesia. Kembangkan daya istirahatmu dalam semua selimu. Universitas Islam Negeri, hiduplah kebersamaan-lamanya. Universitas Islam Negeri, hiduplah kebersamaan-lamanya.
Program Studi Biologi merupakan salah satu program studi yang terdapat di Fakultas Sains dan Teknologi yang ditunjang dengan sarana dan prasarana yang memadai. Terdapat 4 gedung pada Fakultas Sains dan Teknologi, yaitu Gedung C, Gedung D, Gedung E, dan gedung F. Pusat aktivitas Fakultas Sains dan Teknologi berada di gedung D, yang merupakan tempat beraktivitas utama para sivitas akademika, mulai dari dekan, wakil dekan, ketua dan sekretaris jurusan, ruang rapat, taman baca dengan beberapa koleksi bacaan berupa textbook, jurnal, skripsi, laporan, tesis, dan disertasi, ruang ketua jurusan, sekretaris jurusan, dan juga ruang jurnal biogenesis yang saat ini telah terakreditasi Nasional Sinta 2 dan dalam proses menuju indeks Scopus. Dalam menunjang proses pembelajaran, terdapat ruang perkuliahan yang nyaman yang berlokasi di gedung C. Dan juga 5 laboratorium yang merupakan manifestasi dari 5 bonggol keilmuan biologi.
Hello, Mr. Sarif. Are you there? Mr. Sarif Hidayat Amrullah. Dear Hamza, are you ready?
Siap, siap.
In English, thank you. Ustaz Dirham. Wait, while we waiting the moderator, Mr. Ula. Welcome, Mr. Amrullah. Are you ready?
I'm sorry, Miss Isna. Can you hear me?
I hear you, but it's not clear.
Clear, yeah. Okay, wait.
Could you use
Check sound.
headset there?
Miss Isna, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, Mr. Roswar, it's clear.
Nggak bagus ya, Rian, kayak di sana. Check. Is it clear now?
Yeah, it's okay right now, Mr. Ula.
Okay,
It's
thank
clear.
you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We can begin now. The computer. All right. Ascend to the thing. Time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good morning to our college from Indonesia and outside Indonesia. Thank you for joining the general lecture on bird diversity based on biogeography conducted by Department of Biology, Faculty of Science and Technology, Universitas Islam Negeri Alauddin Makassar, Indonesia. Working with Las Areas Nature Reserve, Sarapiqui, Costa Rica, Central America. I am Aswar Rustam, MSI, will be the master of ceremony in this session from now on. And we have Mr. Sarif Hidayat Amrullah, MSc. He will moderate the main event later. For the commit and participant joining offline in this room, kindly have a seat and switch your microphone to silent mode to avoid interruption. And for the participant to join virtually, kindly turn on your camera, mute your microphone, and pay attention to the presentation. Thank you. And now, we move to the welcoming remarks by the head of the Department of Biology, Dr. Masriani, MSI, and officially opening the agenda. We are pleased to have Dr. Masriani, MSI, deliver her speech to begin the program. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Aswar. Is my voice heard? Hello?
Yes, Miss.
Yes, I can hear you clearly, Mrs. Mr.
Okay, thank you. Honorable distinguished resource persons, respected participants, students, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
I'm sorry because there is technical problem. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good morning I bid to all of you. Thank you to each and everyone for being here with us today. First of all praises and gratitude always utter to the Almighty Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, the most merciful and the most gracious, because with His blessings we are gathered here today for the general lecture. Salawat and greetings are also delivered to the last Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his friends and family. May we all get intercession on the end. Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, in this opportunity, it's my privilege and great pleasure on behalf of Department of Biology to welcome you here today. I would like to express my gratitude to the keynote speakers, Mr. David Segera, BSc, who will explore the bird diversity based on biogeography, along with his experimental research. I hope all of the students pay more attention during the lecture. You can ask Mr. David anything related to the topic, so do not miss this precious chance. Once again, thank you, Mr. David, for your dedication to deliver amazing and excited topics today in this conference. In addition, Department of Biology has signed the MOU with Las Arrieras Nature Reserve, and this event is one of our objective collaboration in this year. After the conference 2 years ago, as our hope, this cooperation will exist in the future, and we can expand with academic collaboration in scientific research project and publication. I also welcome the presence here at the general lecture of so many representatives of students, lecturers, and other in participating today. That many of you have willingly joined to be here serves as a reminder to us all just know how important the lecture is. We hope that during this lecture, the other participants also can give the intentions regarding this event. And last, let us open this event with saying Basmalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we will have outstanding moderators, Mr. Sharif Hidayat Amrullah, MSc. We moderate our presentation panel and discussion later. Time is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Arswar Rustam.
I'm sorry, Mr. Sharif Hidayat Amrullah. Before that, we had to the course session today. Let's raise our hand and make doa, whom Ustaz Mr. Dirhamsa MPDE will lead. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Aswar. Cek. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh.
Ladies and gentlemen, please allow us to lead the prayer in Islamic way. For ladies and gentlemen, what other religions can adjust according to our religion. A'udzubillahi minasyaitonirrajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Hamdan syakirin, hamdan na'imin. Hamdan yuwafi ni'mahu wa yukafi'u mazidah. Ya Rabbana lakal hamdu kama yanbaghi li jalali wajhikal karim wa azimi sultanik. Allahumma sholli ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. Allahumma inna nas'aluka khaira hazihi barnamij wa khaira ma fiha wa na'udzubika min syarri wa syarri ma fiha. Allahumma ja'al jam'ana hasa jam'an marhumah wa tafarruqana min ba'dihi tafarruqan ma'sumah wa la taj'al fina wa la minna syaqiyya wa la mahruma. Allahumma inna nas'alukal huda wat tuqa wal afa wal ghina wa nas'aluka ilman nafi'a wa rizqan thayyiba wa amalan makbula. Allahumma anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa 'allimna ma yanfa'una wa zidna ilman warzuqna fahma. Allahumma inna na'udzubika min ilmin la yanfa' wa min qalbin la yakhsha wa min nafsin la tasba wa min du'ain la yasma. Allahumma rabbana la tusi' qulubana ba'da idh hadaitana wa hab lana min ladunka rahmah innaka antal wahhab. Allahumma rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina azabannar. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun alal mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Then we continue to Mr. Syarif Hidayat Amrullah to moderate our presentation panel and discussion later. Time is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Aswar Ustam. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
All praise be to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, who has given us all salvation and blessing in life, the Lord who created this world. I'll never forget to give salawat and salam to our beloved Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who really loved by Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala and saved the human life from destruction in the safety. That's the right path of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Good morning and good evening to all audience here and our beloved keynote speaker, Mr. David in Costa Rica. Good evening, Mr. David. Thank you very much for joining our lecturing series that conducted by Department of Biology, Faculty of Science and Technology, Universitas Islam Negeri Alauddin Makassar. I am Syarif Hidayat Amrullah, will moderate the session from now on. Please stay at the Zoom meeting, turn on your camera, mute your microphone, and pay attention to the presentation. And in this session, we have one and only speaker, Mr. David Segura Sequeira, BSc, Director of Las Arrieras Nature Reserve, Sarapique, Costa Rica, Central America. Good evening, Mr. David. Can you hear my voice?
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes. You have some new haircut, maybe. It looks so different from your picture in the flyer.
Oh yes, that that was a few years back.
You look so cool. You look so cool, and you can have many fans from here. And how do you do?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. Right now is 8 p.m. It's a bit late for us.
Okay, well, this is actually our second meeting, right? After
It's the
the
second.
ICOBALS, yeah, after the
Mhm.
ICOBALS seminar the previous year, we hope we can meet you not only virtually, but also in person. We'd love for you to
Sure.
come see us in Indonesia, and we are traveling, and maybe we are traveling to Costa Rica for a study tour one day. Yeah, what do you think?
We'll be glad to receive you, and it will be fine to visit Indonesia too.
Well, before we begin the session, let me read the brief biography for Mr. David Segura Sekera, BSc. Mr. Davis is a field biologist specialized in tropical ecosystem with emphasis on ornithology and landscape analysis through Geographical Information System, or GIS. He got his degree in tropical biology in the National University of Costa Rica. He also has some research experiences, including the first bird bander and surveyor of bird population, CATIE, Cartago, Costa Rica in 2014. The second, field assistant and data manager for researcher in National University of Costa Rica in 2017, creator of heat maps with GIS University of Costa Rica in 2019, bird bander for the Neotropical Flyways project of SELPA, Colombian NGO, and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in 2020. Director of Las Arrieras Nature Reserve from 2019 until now. Mr. David also got awards and honor for Scotch Fund of the Ornithological Association of Costa Rica in 2020. Mr. David is active in writing academic publication, short note, presentation, assistance to Congress and symposiums. He is also one of our member of editorial board of Biogenesis, Jurnal Ilmiah Biologi. Thank you very much for your valuable insight into our journal, Mr. David. So we will stay together for the next 60 minutes for your presentation, and then 30 minutes for the Q&A session. I'll remind you of the time during the session, and for all participants, whenever you want to ask the question for Mr. David, you are very welcome to fill in the chat room or raise your hand. Ladies and gentlemen, please give applause to Mr. David, and now the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I have a question. I sent the presentation to you guys. You're going to present it, or do I share it through my computer? Okay. Okay, that's great. Mm-hmm. Okay, there it is. Well, good morning, everybody. Right now, there, does anybody? Okay, great. So yeah, good morning, everybody. And actually, it's good evening for me since it's 8 p.m. right now in Costa Rica. It's still Thursday here. My name is David Segura Sequeira. I am a tropical ornithologist from Costa Rica. And currently I work as the chief manager of Las Arrieras Nature Reserve here in the Caribbean of Costa Rica, where we're doing a lot of work with not only scientific projects, but also with ecotourism and environmental education. We got a lot of projects with birds, with landscape analysis, and also with amphibian restoration projects. So for me, it's a great honor to be in this opportunity, my second opportunity with you guys. So I need to say thanks, not only to the prestigious university, but also to the Department of Biology, and a special thanks to Professor Isna, as she has been the person who has invited me a couple of times. So I was talking a few weeks back when Isna told me about doing this presentation, and she was very eager to know about bird diversity in Costa Rica. So being Costa Rica, a very small country with a massive biodiversity, taking into consideration how small we are, I thought about this country being the perfect example to speak about bird diversity in biogeographic terms on how species diversify in tropical environments. So I titled this presentation, Bird Diversity in Costa Rica, a biogeographic insight on species diversification in the tropics. So anything, like any questions, we will have a space at the end of this presentation, or you can either send them through my email that is on the past slide. There is my email, and you will send me anything that you want to further discuss with me. Okay, so we're going to talk about the geological history of Costa Rica. Not only Costa Rica, but the region itself where we are located. We are a very recent country in terms of geological time. We are about 3 million years old, which is nothing compared to the whole age of planet Earth. But the process of the creation of Costa Rica was so violent and so fast that it, as a result of this process, several geographic landmarks were formed that are the immediate responsible for the diversity of birds, and not only birds, but all the organisms that live in Costa Rica. So we're going to spend half of this presentation talking about this geological and geographic background to understand why do we have such a vast diversity. Then we're going to start talking about bird life based on the ecozones, which these ecozones are based on the geographic landmarks that we will see. And at the end, we're going to be talking about bird endemism in Costa Rica with just a few examples of certain bird species that occur in this region. Just from the start, right when we begin, we'll start to see all the evolutionary drivers of bird species in tropical environments, because as the same happens in here, it happens in the whole world, at least under the tropical life zone. So next slide, please. Okay, so where is Costa Rica? A lot of people confused us with other country called Puerto Rico. Some people say that we're an island, but the fact is that we are part of mainland and we're a really small country. To make things easier for you guys in Indonesia, if you go to Jakarta and start digging a hole through the earth, the place where you're gonna come out on the other side of the planet is Costa Rica, more or less. So we're on the complete opposite side of the planet for you. That is called a geographic antipode. And as you can imagine, the same as Indonesia, Costa Rica is a tropical country. We are a bit more into the northern hemisphere, but we are still on the tropical circle of the planet. So things don't change that much. Please, next slide. Okay. So this is the American continent, is this big landmass that goes from almost the North Pole to the South Pole. And the American continent is treated as a single continent, but this is mostly for geopolitical issues. Actually, America is composed of 2 different continents. As you can see here, there are 2 big land masses. One is North America and the other is South America. Both of them are on top of enormous tectonic plates that compose those 2 separate continents. North America is the place where you will find countries like Mexico, like the United States, Canada. And on South America, you will find the Amazon rainforest, Brazil, Argentina, the World Cup champions of football. And Costa Rica is neither on North America or South America. We're in an isolated place in the middle of them that is called Central America. We are not part of those continents. We are recent land. We were recently formed. So as you can see there, that yellow arrow at the center, that's the place where Costa Rica is located, just in the middle of the 2 continents on that small bridge that connects both continents. And we are also in the middle of 2 of the big oceans of the planet Earth, which are the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. So we're in the middle of very big things, right? But Costa Rica, as already said, is a pretty recent land. So please, next slide. Next slide, please. There. Okay, so 225 million years ago, there was a supercontinent called Pangaea. Pangaea is where all the known continents that we know from today were gathered into a single supercontinent. And as you can see there, those yellow arrows are the former positions of North America and South America. As you can see there was a complete connection between the two land masses. So plants and animals were always moving from one place to the other, and there was always connection between populations of species that lived on those regions of planet Earth. But what happened? 25 millions into the future, what you will see on the right of the slide is that those two purple arrows show the location of North America and South America 200 million years ago. And in the middle of them, where there is a red arrow, there is a sea. So what happened? The continent of, well, the supercontinent of Pangaea started to drift away to the positions of the continents where we find them nowadays. And what happened now is that both North America and South America are completely isolated from one another. So all the animals and plants that live in these regions were now completely isolated. There were no connection between them. So what happened is that they started to derive into new species, and now North America and South America will become two different biological realms. And for the next 140 million years into the future, these continents were never in contact ever again. So please, next slide. So, as I said, 140 million years into the future, what you'll find is the North America and South America were really close to the positions where you would find them nowadays. But as you can see in that red arrow at the center of the two continents, there was still a gap between them. There was no connection between the two continents.
Mr. David? Mr. David?
Maybe he lost his connection. Mr. David? Can you hear us? Hello, Mr. David.
Does anyone hear me?
Yes. Okay. Please continue your presentation.
Okay, yeah, something strange happened. So yeah, the orange circle is where the two different tectonic plates starting to interact between themselves. And what this happened with all these processes is that a lot of different earthquakes, a lot of different volcanic activities started to take place. Please, next slide. see that because of that process of volcanic
Mr. David?
Yeah. Does anyone hear me? I'm having a lot of problems with internet.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
please
Let's see
continue
if I.
your presentation.
Okay. I think everything is working now. Okay, so yeah, so I was saying that new islands started to appear, and what that happened to the future, 56 million years ago, that a new arc of volcanic islands started to appear. So please, next slide. And this is the result of that volcanic and tectonic process. 2.8 million years ago, all these islands were already connected between themselves, and North America and South America have now a bridge in between them that connects them. That bridge is Costa Rica, which is that yellow arrow, and right next to us is another country called Panama. But I won't mention Panama because I don't want to make things more difficult to understand. But 2.8 million years ago, a new bridge of land was formed in between the two continents. So please, next slide. Great. So now that we have a new bridge connecting two different continents that have been isolated for 140 million years, now that isolation is finally put an end to it, right? The bridge. And what happened is one of the biggest events that had ever occurred with biological creatures, and is the Great American Biotic Interchange. And what happened is that now that all these organisms have a bridge, they can now cross to the other side. So a lot of animals from South America, like anteaters, like armadillos, like the sloths, they started to go into North America. And the same happened on the way down with bears, with dogs, with all the dog family, with the cat family. All those animals that were from North America starting to go into the south. So once the bridge was formed 2 million years ago, full scale migration started to occur, not only to get to the new places that were formed here in Costa Rica, but also to the other side of the continent. And what happened is that a very big process of adaptive radiation started to take place. So a lot of different species started to colonize these new lands. They started to occupy all the different niches that were now created here. And they were just starting to diversify into a lot of different species. Now I had to make something clear. The full-scale migrations started right when the bridge was formed. But as you may know, there are a lot of animals that are more able to migrate to other areas without the need of uninterrupted land, right? Take, for example, birds. Right when there was only islands and there was not a continuous bridge, birds can fly from South America into those islands and jump to North America. So there are several species that they didn't need the existence of a bridge to go to the other side. Just that the full-scale migration started right when that bridge was formed. Okay, please, next slide. Okay, so that's the geological past of Costa Rica. Now we need to understand the geography of Costa Rica. And for this, I must say that Costa Rica is a pretty small country. Just to make things easier for you, we are about the same size to South Sulawesi. We are all 51,000 kilometers wide. That's a bit bigger than South Sulawesi, but we are almost the same. So you know how small we are. But even though they were so small, as you can see in that topographical map on your right, Costa Rica is a pretty complex territory in terms of its geography. All that white patches that you see in the center of our country, those are mountains that at certain areas you can see that it's pretty irregular and uneven, the terrain that we have in here, but we also have a lot of lowlands, a lot of valleys. The coastline is pretty irregular on the Pacific, on the left side of our country. So I don't know if you can see there the central mountain range, that white area in the center of the country goes like in a straight line from the northwest to the southeast. Take that into mind. Okay, please, next slide. Okay, there. So this red arrow shows the direction of the mountains of Costa Rica. All these mountains were the first islands that were created in between the two continents. So they are among the tallest peaks of Costa Rica. And these mountains, as you can see in that straight line, they go, or they divide the country in two. So you see here that at the north and east of Costa Rica, right on top of that map, is the Caribbean slope, which is that green area, is the lowland area of Costa Rica. And if you go to the west and to the south, that's the other side of Costa Rica, which is called the Pacific slope, right? Because it's in contact with the Pacific Ocean. So now we're going to talk about each one of these different regions that you can find in Costa Rica. Please, next slide. Thank you. So the Caribbean slope is that region with the red shape. That's the environment that is always present here is the classical tropical rainforest. When you say tropical rainforest, what you imagine is exactly what you will find here, with a lot of trees that are very tall. You'll find pretty dense vegetation. It's pretty warm, a lot of rain. There are a lot of mosquitoes too that are always biting you. And what you can see there inside that shape is that it's pretty wide. It's a lot of lowlands, and there are almost no mountains inside of this red shape, right? There are a few peaks there and then, but almost all the land is flat. Another thing is that we receive a lot of rain. Where there are some areas where there is almost 12 meters of rain per meter every year. They're among the top 20 places with the most rain on planet Earth. And that is because on the corner of this slide on your right, that's the Atlantic Ocean. A lot of winds are coming inside of Costa Rica from that ocean. They're carrying a lot of moisture into the land, and because that's the first place where that moisture touches land, all that moisture turns into rain and is downpours every time in this region. So again, it's pretty flat land. There's a lot of water coming from the sky. So this region is also very famous because of the big amount of wetlands they would find here. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here's a picture. This is the place where I work. As you can see, this is the classical tropical rainforest that you will find in the Caribbean. And on the background, that's how flat and wide this area of the country is. There are no mountains. This day was perfect. As you can see, there are no clouds, but the normal thing is that everything is covered with clouds and it's always raining. That's the normal thing up there. Okay, please, next slide. Okay, and that is what I was telling you. All the moisture coming from the Atlantic Ocean, which is that yellow star, all the clouds are coming in through the country and they are always present on top of the Caribbean. But as you can see, that red line is like stopping all that all those clouds from coming into the whole territory of Costa Rica. That red line is the central mountain range that we already saw in the past slide. So what they are working is like some kind of a wall that is detaining all the different clouds that are coming from the Caribbean Sea, right? So there's a lot of rain, and both in the Caribbean slope and in the mountains. But as you can see, the Pacific slope has no clouds, right? We're going to talk about that later. So please, next slide. Okay, so that's the Pacific slope. It's divided into two different regions. But as you can see in both of them, the geography of them is more complex compared to the Caribbean slope of Costa Rica. It's not that flat, it's not that wide. They have a lot more of mountains inside of the different regions. And look at the coastline, it's way more complex. It has peninsulas, it has gulfs. So the diversity of ecosystems here is a bit bigger compared to the Caribbean slope. Now, as I already said, the Pacific slope is divided into two different regions, right? The red shape on top of the slide, that's the North Pacific. And what characterizes this land is that it's pretty dry. And that's because all the rain that is coming in the Caribbean, once it crosses all that wind into the Pacific, it has no water with it. All the water was put down as rain on top of the Caribbean. So all these areas of the North Pacific, what you will find is tropical dry forest. The normal thing is that you will find a lot of dry environments in here. Then the other area here is the South Pacific, which is way different than the North, because again, it's an humid place. It's actually really similar to the Caribbean. And there are a couple of reasons of why this happened. The first is that, as you can see, right on top of that yellow shape, there is a big and thick area of mountains that kind of protecting the South Pacific and is isolating it. So there is a lot of isolation in this land, and we're going to see later that this creates the perfect opportunity for species to diversify and become endemic to this region. Another thing is that since the South Pacific, sorry, can you go to the past slide? A bit back. One more. There. As you can see there, the yellow shape is on the south of Costa Rica. So it's more close to the equator than any other region of Costa Rica. That means that that specific region is under the influence of the intertropical convergence zone. This zone is also present in Indonesia. Is all this area of this belt, if you want to call it that way, that goes all across the equator of the planet. It is where all the winds from the north and all the winds from the south come into convergence, and they are carrying a lot of water because all the winds are mostly from the ocean, so they're carrying a lot of moisture. And these regions near to the equator are the most rainy areas of the planet. So the South Pacific is really under this, under the influence of this region. So please, next slide. There. So that image shows perfectly what I was telling about. This was the best slide that we already saw. So the Caribbean is full of clouds. It's always full of clouds. But right on top of that yellow star is the North Pacific. As you can see, there are no clouds. Everything is more dry because all the rain was let the air more dry over these areas. But look at the south, right on the right side of that yellow star, that's the South Pacific. And as you can see, there the convergence zone, all those clouds are on top of this region, making it a lot more humid than its northernmost counterpart. Okay, please, next slide. Okay, here's a picture of the North Pacific of Costa Rica. This is the classical landscape that you will find there during the dry season. Actually, we are right now during the dry season. And as you can see, everything is dry. This is a tropical dry forest. And one important feature during these months is that the trees lose all their leaves in order to survive to the intense drought that is always occurring during these months of from November to April. Okay, next slide. And this is the South Pacific. The South Pacific, as you can see, is pretty similar in the ecosystem as the Caribbean. It's again, it's a tropical rainforest, but look at the background. There are more mountains. There are more diverse geographically coastline, right? So there are a lot more things occurring there than occur on the Caribbean counterpart. Okay, next slide. There, okay. So finally, these are the highlands of Costa Rica. On the yellow area, those are mostly volcanoes, both active volcanoes, inactive volcanoes. There are some that are very extinct, but what really dominates the landscape here is just volcanoes. Those are actually the first islands that appeared when the country was forming some million years ago, right? And on the red shape, as you can see, that's a really big area of irregular terrain. This is the most irregular and uneven terrain that you will find in Costa Rica. That's called the Talamanca mountain range, and is where the highest mountains of Costa Rica are located. One of them is actually 3,800 meters above sea level, and most of the mountains you will find here are on top of that 3,000 level above the sea. And the normal temperature here is pretty cold. It's around 10 degrees Celsius, and the normal rain patterns here is just pure rain for most part of the year. The dominant ecosystem that you will find here is a tropical cloud forest, and above the 3,000 meters above sea level, what you will find is the timberline. That is that place where there are no trees growing, is almost shrubs what grows in there. And those are the areas where thousands of years ago, there were some glaciers because of the last ice ages that occurred on planet Earth. So these regions, we're going to see a picture later, where the places where glaciers were present. Please, next slide. Okay, so that's the typical picture of the tropical cloud forest. As you can see, it's very appropriately, there is a cloud crossing the forest, and the trees are always full of epiphytes on their branches. So you will find a lot of orchids, a lot of mosses, a lot of bromeliads growing on top of those branches, just because of the high level of moisture that you will find in these forests. Okay, next picture. Please, next slide. Okay, so that's the timberline. What I was saying is a place where almost no trees grow. It's almost just shrubs growing around. And these were the places where there used to be a lot of glaciers thousands of years ago. Please go a bit back. Okay, yeah. So these are the top mountains of Costa Rica. There is nothing more high than these peaks. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so we finally covered all the geological and geographical background of Costa Rica. So as you can imagine, any place in the tropics, if it has complex geography, it means that it will have a very rich biodiversity. That's because the more complex geographically a place is, it means that it will have a lot more of ecosystems, a lot more of microclimates, which introduce into a lot more of niches that a species can occupy. So as the amount of ecosystems goes up, the amount of places for a species to diversify occur. So Costa Rica, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, is a mega diverse country. We are pretty small, but even though that we are such a small country, we have 6% of the planet's diversity. We are 0.03% of the world land, but we have the 6% of the planet diversity, which is a big amount of creatures and organisms living here, taking into consideration how small we are. Right now, we have 91,000 species described, and some scientists have already published some information about a potential of 600,000 species to occur here in Costa Rica. So there is a long way to work until we reach that level of diversity. But as you can tell, Costa Rica has a lot of potential based on how complex its geography is. Okay, please, next slide. Okay, finally, we're into birds. So birds, they are the most studied living creatures on planet Earth. People tend to like them more compared to other organisms. For example, what I mean with this is that people are unlikely to hate birds compared, for example, with insects. A lot of people don't like insects. I love insects, but I know that a lot of people don't like the cockroaches, that are other people that don't like spiders, that don't like scorpions. But people are always in love with birds. It's really hard to find someone throwing hate into birds. So they are very loved creatures. Also, you don't need a PhD to identify them. Every single person can tell the common birds that occur at their gardens, right? You don't need to study for 4 years in order to separate different species of birds. They're actually, right now, we have even tools that can identify them automatically. And the final point is that they're really easy to detect. You can tell a bird is present if you hear their song, if you see them flying around. They're really easy to find them at the different habitats, right? You don't need to wear very specialized equipment to find them at a place. So they are perfect organisms for research. And based on this, every country has a good idea of their diversity. There are very big groups of people, both scientists and just people that love birds. They're always trying to write down all the observations that they have in order to have a good idea on the bird diversity of a country. So every country really knows the amount of birds that they have. And Costa Rica is not the exception for this. We are really in love with our birds. And so far, our bird list, the national bird list, is on 933 species. We had a new bird like a month ago. And that means that we are with the 10% of the world's diversity of birds, which is a big amount of feathery creatures. And out of this number, 107 of these species are endemic to this region, not only or not specifically to Costa Rica, but also to our neighboring countries, which are Panama and Nicaragua. These two countries share our endemic birds too. Okay, please, next slide. Okay, so we have more than 900 bird species in Costa Rica. How are they distributed in this small yet complex territory, right? Not all birds occur everywhere, just as every other species on planet Earth. You will find them where they are more capable of finding food, where they are more, where they will find a shelter, where they can breed, right? The species love to, or they live at the places where they need the least amount of energy to have a good life. So not all birds occur everywhere, even though they can fly around. And I separated the birds of Costa Rica, the bird endemism hotspot, in different ecozones, which I appropriately put as the same as the 4 regions that we already saw of the geographic landmarks of Costa Rica. So the first one is the Caribbean on the red top of this slide. Then we have the North Pacific with yellow, South Pacific is dark blue, and finally we get the highlands with the purple color. I'm gonna give an example of endemic bird of each of these areas. I would love to tell about more examples. We have more than 100 birds of endemic birds, but if I start talking about birds, we're gonna be here until tonight, until next day for me. Okay, let's go. Please, next slide. Okay, so the Caribbean slope. As you can remember, the environment here is pretty humid, and the classical environment that you will find, or the classical ecosystem that you will find here, is the tropical rainforest. And all these birds that are endemic to this region, some of them has this tendency or special thing of migrating from the foothills to the lowlands. The foothills of the Caribbean is that yellow line that you see. Sorry, on that yellow line that you see on the map. Those are the first mountains that appear in the Caribbean. So there are a lot of birds that are always flying from these mountains, from this yellow line. They go there for breeding, they find a lot of food, and after they finish their reproductive season, they fly into the lowlands searching for new resources, and they already exploited most of the ones from the yellow line. So we're going to see an example of this classic behavior. Please, next slide. Okay, so this impressive bird is called the bird-necked umbrella bird, Cephalopterus glabricolis. The name is pretty appropriate. As you can see, the shape of this bird's head is like an umbrella because it has this crest of feathers that has this pretty strange shape. It also has that red pouch on the chest and the throat. That is the male. This is a male in the photo. It inflates it in order to be more attractive for the females. And you can see there on the right side of the slide, that's the range of this bird in Costa Rica and Panama, onto the right of the map. So this is an endemic bird to the Caribbean. You see there the distribution is just on the Caribbean slope. And there are two different colors. The orange color symbolizes the mountain foothills, what I was telling you. This bird reproduces and breeds on this orange side, which is almost mountains. And then once they already have succeeded with the breeding season, they start flying into the lowlands in search for more resources to exploit while they are waiting for the next breeding season. So they are called the altitudinal migrants. And we have seen that a lot of the endemic birds of the Caribbean are always doing this pattern. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is the North Pacific. As I told, the environment here is pretty dry, and the classical environment that you will find here is the tropical dry forest. And the birds distribution here is almost based on the extent of this dry forest. So a lot of the birds that are found here can only be seen in this region of the planet. Sorry, let me do something there. Okay, can only be seen in the region of this planet. Please, next slide, so that I can explain. Yeah, this is the first example. This is called the Hoffman's woodpecker. It's a beautiful bird, typical of the Pacific side, the North Pacific side of Costa Rica and Nicaragua. It's an endemic bird, and as you can see on the map, it's always distributed along this Pacific slope. These birds of the North Pacific are presenting a curious behavior. Specifically this bird, we have seen that they are starting to expand their range into the Caribbean, which is a completely different environment, right? There are two different hypotheses. The first one is, and the most accepted one, is that the Caribbean right now is under a lot of threat because they're cutting down all the rainforest in order to grow different products like pineapple, like banana plantations. So the forest is getting smaller, and because there are clearings along all the landscape, the Hoffman's woodpecker, which is really, they like a lot the open areas, they are starting to use these new gaps to get into the Caribbean, which is not their normal range. Another thing, another hypothesis is that they're starting to expand because of global warming, because the Caribbean of Costa Rica is receiving less rain every single year. There is a trend of reducing the amount of rain that they receive. So this species, along with other ones, are starting to get a new home in the Caribbean of Costa Rica. Please, next slide. Okay, this is not an endemic bird. This is called the lesser ground cuckoo, but I want to put this example just because it shows perfectly the way on which a lot of different species started to move along the two different continents once the bridge of Central America was formed. As I said, there was no land in between North America and South America, but once the bridge of Costa Rica and Panama was created, a lot of different birds, a lot of different organisms started to move to the other country, the other continent, sorry. And this is an example. The lesser ground cuckoo, as you can see, it distributes from Mexico all the way down into Costa Rica. This bird is typically of dry forests, and its distribution, as you can see in the map, is just based on the availability of tropical dry forests. And look at that, they stop their range right on the North Pacific of Costa Rica. That's the point where you will find the southernmost distribution of this dry forest. So this is a classical example of how to explain the biotic interchange that occurred millions of years back of northern organisms moving to the south. Okay, please, next slide. Okay, and the South Pacific. Now, you can remember here, the South Pacific is a pretty humid environment too. The classical ecosystem that you will find here is a tropical rainforest. It's pretty similar to the Caribbean, but it's pretty isolated due to all those mountains that surround this area. So there is a lot of bird endemism in this region based on this isolation that don't let populations move out of this blue shape that you see on the map. Please, next slide. Okay, so I know if you have ever heard about the smallest birds on planet Earth, they are the hummingbirds. And the hummingbirds are an American group of birds. They only occur here in America, and we have a pretty big diversity. There are birds that really tend to diversify a lot, and this really scales up at the tropical environments. This is called the great-crested coquette, Lophornis aurabilis. This is the male. And as you can see, look at that map, the range of this bird is perfectly matching the southern Pacific of Costa Rica. So it is like trapped in all these mountains, and its only range or the distribution of this bird is based on the South Pacific. Now, hummingbirds are very funny because they love to drink nectar. That's their main diet. So these birds are always doing local migrations in order to get the different resources of flowering trees. So sometimes you will find them in certain areas of the South Pacific where there are a lot of different trees with flowers. And once those flowers die and start producing fruit, all the hummingbirds start moving to other areas of the South Pacific in order to get more plants with flowers. So they're always moving around the South Pacific, but they don't get out of that region. Okay, please, next slide. Okay, and finally we get the highlands. As I said, it's pretty rainy and the environment is pretty cold. What really dominates all this land is the tropical cloud forest. And this region of Costa Rica, all the mountains, are the biggest bird endemism region. Most of our endemic birds only occur on the highlands, and there is a very unique explanation for this. I'm going to explain on the next slide, please. Okay, so as I told, the highlands of Costa Rica were the first islands that started to appear between North America and South America. Those first volcanic and tectonic islands are what are now considered the highlands of Costa Rica. And as you can remember, I told that there are certain organisms that are more capable of dispersing from one place to another. Take, for example, birds. They were already flying into these islands in order to move to North America. So what happened? Oh, sorry, please, the last slide. Please, the next. Can you go please to the last slide? That one. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so what happened is that lots of birds genera from the Andes mountain chain in South America, in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru. That's where the Andes are located. The Andes are among the tallest mountains of planet Earth. And the normal ecosystem that you will find there is the tropical cloud forest. So during the ice ages that we had thousands of years ago, the extent of the tropical cloud forest was a lot more than you will find nowadays, because the tropical cloud forest is only found at the highlands. But because there was colder conditions on planet Earth, these tropical cloud forests have more disponibility of land to colonize because everything was more colder. So the extent of this forest was way bigger back then. And what this helped, oh, so I haven't. Okay, what happened is that because the highland habitats were more extensive, now the Andes birds were capable to colonize these volcanic islands because they will find there pretty similar conditions to the ones that they had at the Andes. So what happened is that these islands have had more time for species radiation, right? They have had more years in order to get new species compared, for example, to the Pacific lowland, to the Caribbean lowland, which are the most recent areas of Costa Rica, since it's just the product of erosion. But these first islands, or the highlands nowadays, have been here for more millions of years compared to the rest of the country. So birds have had more time to diversify into new groups of species. Okay, please, next slide. Okay, and this is a classical example. This is the volcano hummingbird, Celasphorus blamula. The volcano hummingbird, I think, I'm not correctly, or I'm not pretty precise on this data, but I think it is the third smallest bird on planet Earth. It's a really small bird. It's about this size, about the size of my thumb. And as you can see, the distribution of these birds is only on the highlands of Costa Rica, right in the center. And there are three different populations. One is, two of them are on volcanoes, which are on the top purple spots on that range on the map you see there. And the other ones are on the mountain chain of Talamanca at the south, which is that long purple chain. So you'll see that depending on where you are, you'll find different colors on the males. If you are on the top spot, you will find the hummingbird you see on the left corner with the pink throat. If you are on the center one, you will find a more darker color in the throat. And if you are on the Talamanca mountain chain, the big purple patch, you will see that males have a purple throat. So they are starting to diversify. They haven't diversified to the point of becoming separate species, but they are just about there, right? Okay, please, next slide. Okay, here is another example. This is the spangled cheek tanager, Tangara dobi. this group of tanagers, these birds, as you can see, they are located again just on the highest mountain of Costa Rica. And this group, the tanagers, are a classical neotropical group. They can only be found in South America. There are certain species that have gone all the way up to the top of North America, but most of the biggest diversity, you will find it just as you get closer to the equator. And this example, the spangled cheek tanager, is one of those birds that flew into the first volcanic islands and started to diversify into what we have now with this beautiful bird. Okay, next slide.
David, sorry to inform you, you have 15 minutes left.
15 minutes, okay, great. I have more. Okay, this slide is pretty special because it shows one of the classic things that we see during the university, which is the allopatric speciation. As you can remember from the basic classes of evolution, sometimes there is a barrier that separates populations or species, and now that there is a wall in between them, say for example a lake, say for example a river, separates both populations, they are unable to mix with one another. And as you go through time, a lot of mutations started to occur in those two populations, and those mutations start to accumulate to the point that then after thousands of years and thousands of generations, the two populations diversify into different species. And this is very common in Costa Rica due to the Central Mountain Range. As you can remember, it divides the country in two. So what you will find is a bird that looks very similar to its counterpart of the other side of the mountain. So birds from the Pacific slope are like sisters to the Caribbean slope. And here are some examples. You'll find this white bird, which is called cotingas, or genus Carpodectes. If you are at the Pacific slope, you will find the endemic yellow-billed cotinga, which is this white bird with a yellow bill or yellow beak. But if you see on the Caribbean slope, we have another endemic bird called the snowy cotinga. It's exactly the same bird. If you see it, it's white, it has the same shape, but look at the beak, it's dark. It's another species. So these two are sister species. Next example, we have the manakins, these birds on the center. That's the genus Manacus. Again, if you are at the Pacific, you will find the bird with the orange color. But if you are at the Caribbean, you will find the white colored manakin, which is this one with the white throat and nape. But again, look at them. They look just exactly the same bird. The thing is that the feathers and the mutations have provoked that these two are now separate species. And at last, we have this group of classical tropical species called the toucans. These are called arasaris. And those are from the genus Pteroglossus. If you are at the Pacific slope, you will find that bird with the red bill. That's called the fire-billed arasari. And if you go to the Caribbean, you will find a very similar toucan called the collared arasari with the white bill. So it's very interesting how this mountain really stops birds from mixing their genes, and they have gone through a lot of adaptive radiation processes to become what we know today. And this process is still continuing. They are continuing. There are a lot of different birds that are already looking very different from one side to the other, but we haven't still considered them as a species, just as subspecies, but they are just on the way to become different birds. Okay, next slide, please. So at last, I have to say that, okay, we have 900 bird species, more than 900 bird species in Costa Rica. And the bird diversity that we have today might be even bigger than what we know today. And that's because right now we have a better understanding of the concept of what a species is, right? We know when does a species starts and when does a species ends. Most of the time, we have now genetic tools. We have now a lot of different bioacoustic analysis software, for example, so that we can compare if the songs of the different birds that occur in an area are so different that they can understand from one another. I will continue to speak. We have now a lot of different tools in order for species to be more easy to understand, to the point where we can assign what is a species and what is not a bird. So there was another important thing that occurred during the 1970s, and is that, well, I should start saying that in the American continent, we have authorities that are always getting a checklist of the birds that occur in the continent. So they decide what is a species and what is not a species itself. So they're always renewing that information. Every year they publish a paper that shows the new species, that shows the species that we used to treat as separate ones, that there are actually one single species. So this is always changing. But these authorities during the 1970s, they were into a trend of lumping species. That means that they grab two similar looking birds and they merged them into a single bird. But during the 2000s, the trend changed completely. And that is what we're having right now. It is actually the splitting of species. So what we are having right now is that we are grabbing a bird that is considered a single species and started to set apart based on all these technologies and better understanding of species limit. So let's take, for example, the past 2 years. We had here in Costa Rica a bird that was pretty common, and it was the range of this bird come from Guatemala down to Brazil, and we treat it as a single species. But a recent study showed that it is actually not one species, but like 6 different birds. Depending on where you are, you will find 6 different birds. So bird diversity is becoming way bigger than what we know. This is what I mean with this example. And here we have 2 different birds that went through that process. These are called the ground sparrows. And the one on the bottom, the Prevost ground sparrow, was the official bird that occurred from Guatemala to Costa Rica. They certainly look very different, but they were treated as a single species. They say that the one at the top, the Cabanis ground sparrow, was actually a subspecies of the Prevost. But like 6 years ago, there was a very big study here in Costa Rica of the genetic analysis and also bioacoustics analysis of these birds, the Cabanis ground sparrow. And it turned out that the Cabanis is actually a separate species from the Prevosts. So what happened? The authorities grabbed what was a single species and they set it apart into 2 different ones. The special thing is that the Cabanis ground sparrow is one of the few species that are true endemic birds of Costa Rica. We have seen a lot of endemic birds in the past slides, but they are always shared with Panama or with Nicaragua. They are not only found in Costa Rica. But this Cabanis ground sparrow is only found within Costa Rica, and specifically to the Central Valley of Costa Rica, which is a pretty small land. And there are a lot of conservation issues with this bird because the Central Valley of Costa Rica is where most of the population lives. Almost half of Costa Ricans live in this area. So there is a lot of threats going on with the habitat loss for this species. So we're right now under a lot of different research and conservation projects in order to save this new endemic bird that just happened to occur in these lands. So next slide. So that's all. Thanks so much for listening to my presentation. You have there my email at the bottom of this presentation, and you can send anything that you want to there, and I will be more than happy to attend any questions that you have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for an excellent presentation from Mr. David Segura Sekira. And then we have 2 questions from chat room. Yeah, the topic is very interesting since many researchers are showing curiosity in bird diversity. And Mr. David explain one by one. Very interesting to study about bird diversity. Well, we move to the Q&A session. I read two question from chat room, and if anyone want to give question live from camera, please raise your hands and then open up your microphone. I read the question first from Mr. Alexander from Universitas Sulawesi Barat, from West Sulawesi. I will ask David about the connectivity. Is there any connectivity among two closer ecozone in this map? In the map you explained, do the bird mobility from one place to other place? Yeah, would you like to give some explanation about it, David Segera? I'm sure.
Yes. As I told, birds can fly, so they're always moving around. You sometimes actually it's pretty frequent to find birds from a specific ecozone in its closer ecozone next to the normal range of this bird. But the climatic characteristics of each of these ecozones are very, let's say, conspicuous. They're really, how do I say this? Like, take for example the Pacific slope of Costa Rica. Even though that they are in direct connection because they are part of the same slope, they have two completely different ecosystems. So you can go to the exact place where the line is drawn between the two of them, and you will see that if you are like 2 kilometers from that line onto the north, the environment is completely dry. So birds from the most humid areas from the south, you go 4 kilometers down, you'll find that the rainforest is always humid and everything is so different from just a couple of kilometers away from one to another. So birds don't tend to go to the other side because the conditions are completely different to what you will find from one another. So birds, although they sometimes appear in the other area, they don't usually go to the places, and they don't go there, especially during the breeding season. So even though that's a new research that has been coming out thanks to certain researchers on Colombia, they are starting to find out that, for example, in the Pacific slope, sometimes there are no rains on the north and there are rains on the south. And rains are the environmental stimuli that need birds in order to produce hormones to be able to reproduce. Unlike human beings that we can reproduce the whole year, birds need a certain hormone stimuli in order to grow their gonads in order to be able to reproduce. So even though the birds can move from one side to the other, they might not be able to reproduce due to this inactivity of their physiology. So yeah, there can be certain mobility from one place to another. There are connectivity, but birds just don't or are unable to reproduce and mix their genes with other populations of the country.
Okay, thank you for your insightful explanation. How about Mr. Alexander? Is it clear for you?
Okay, thank you. May I turn on the voice, this microphone?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thank you, David, for your explanation. That was interesting because this area in Sulawesi was, still called as the Wallacea region, which is the special region in Indonesia, especially for the biodiversity with high endemicity, like birds, for example. So, so do you think that the connectivity will be a barrier for the species for their movement from one place to another?
Well, it depends. I mean,
Okay.
if they're, you want to
David?
say something? Okay. Yeah, it depends to the grade of how big that connectivity is, right? Because sometimes it's just a few birds that go to the other side, let's say it that way. And they can go to the other side and mix their genes. Sometimes they are able to do that, but the connection between the two populations is not that big in order to have an impact on the whole scale of the landscape. But if you take, for example, a big gap that birds can move around from one place to the other, then obviously the genes in a couple of years would just mixed up, and what used to be two different populations will start to merge into a single one. And those mutations were started to become less and less available, or no, just the opposite. All those mutations were started to appear in all the single individuals of a whole population. So it really depends on the grade of the connectivity that exists between the populations that you're trying to study.
Okay, got it.
Okay, Mr.
Thank you very
Alexander.
much.
If
I'm sorry for
you-
the camera because there is something problem with this. I don't know about the camera laptop, so that's why I turn off the camera just like this. So I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Alexander Kurniawan. If you have some further question, you can contact David by his email and Instagram
Yeah,
account.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very
Alexander.
much.
Then I give a chance from live question from Artareski Permatasari, who raised her hand. Thank you. Please, your question. Arta, just unmute your microphone first.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Syarif dan Amrullah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for interesting presentation today, Mr. David. I have a question. What is the ecology function of the volcano hummingbirds in Costa Rica? And next question is, if I'm not mistaken, in the four slopes there are volcanoes between them, for the volcano gives a major impact on the morphology island population. Thank you.
Yeah, there is 2 point of question from Artareski. What is the ecological function of the volcano? Apa tadi? Yeah, one of the volcano hummingbirds. Yeah.
Well, the ecological function of volcano hummingbirds is that because they live at the highlands of Costa Rica, you can remember there is a very unique environment that occurs there that is called the timberline. The timberline is a place that there are almost no trees, and most of the plants that grow there are shrubs. And since the conditions of this place is really harsh, it's pretty cold, it's with a lot of wind all the time, there are almost no organisms living there. So most of the plants, or a lot of them, depend on the hummingbird to get pollination, because the hummingbirds are really into drinking nectar. So a lot of different plants have derived into a lot of different characteristics in flowers in order to make hummingbirds more attractive to them. So hummingbirds are, well, not only at highlands, but anywhere that they are present, they are very important pollinators for plants. That's their main ecological trait.
Okay. Ecological role from volcano hummingbirds. The main role is pollinator. Artareski Permatasari. Your second question, you can repeat your second question for David.
Yeah, Mr. My question is, if I'm not mistaken, in the first slope, there are volcanoes between them. For the volcano give a major impact on the morphology island population.
Yeah, in the session, there is a volcano istilahnya make a barrier from Caribbean slope and Pacific slope. Are the volcanoes give some effect from the morphological or the appearance of the birds you have researched, David?
I don't understand the question so well. Maybe you can write it down so that I can
just write it down in the chat room, Arta. Your question, your second question. I give the chance for Isbatullah to give a question live while we waiting for the question by Arta from the chat room. Please, Isbatullah, open up your camera and your microphone.
Sorry, did you hear my voice?
Okay, it clears, hears clearly.
Do you hear my voice?
Yeah, we can hear your voice, but just ask the question. But I can hear you.
He can also send the
Sorry, do you hear my
question through the chat.
Yeah, okay. The solution is you send your question in the chat room like Arta did. The second question, if I'm not mistaken, in the fourth slope, there are volcano between them. How the volcano give a major impact on the morphology in the island's population? Please answer the question, David.
Okay. Yes, there are volcanoes between the major ecozones of birds. That's why they are separated into different slopes. But actually, the volcanoes don't have like a big impact on birds, on how birds diversify. Because birds diversify in order to match with the environment where they live. In this case, if they're in the Caribbean slope, they will match all of the species would try to evolve into getting more able to exploit the different resources that are in that place of the Caribbean. The same happened with the Pacific slope, with the highlands. So volcanoes really don't have that much of an impact. Maybe 1,000 years ago, there was a lot of troubles because the volcanoes were more active than they are today. Sorry. But yeah, maybe in morphology, what I would think about of any impact on birds is that certain volcanoes have a really unique environment at their highest peak, right? There are certain volcanoes that we have been doing some research, and there are certain bird species that can only, or certain subspecies of birds that can only be found at certain volcanoes. So there is, for example, a hummingbird that is present in the whole highlands of Costa Rica. But if you go to the northern volcano of Costa Rica, the color of this bird is starting to look completely different to the rest of its former range, right? From the rest of the mountain chain. So yes, there is certain morphology changes that you can perceive in certain birds, but they are still not so different to the grade of being considered a species. Another example is the volcano hummingbird, for example, that we see that there are 4 different colors of birds. But again, it really doesn't have an impact on or the differences are just based on color, but the genetic barriers between one subpopulation or the other are not completely closed in order to tell if one is a species or what is not a species. They are just the same Maybe in the future they will be considered a species, but for now they're just a single bird species.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. Yeah, so there is no major effect, yeah, from the volcano, and it just give some room for the birds to adaptive, yeah, to adaptation, to make some evolve, yeah, to camouflage, yeah, in the mountain, yeah, just like that, Artaras Kiper Matasari. And maybe the last question I read from the room chat room from Anissa. Thank you for the interesting presentation, Mr. David. According to the different look between birds in Pacific slope and Caribbean slope, especially in color, is there possible to separate them to be new species respectively in future, or only being sister species? Sister species. Yeah, I repeat. Is there possible to separate them, yeah, the birds from Pacific slope and Caribbean slope, to be new species respectively in the future, or only being sister species? Yeah. Please.
Yes, great question. Thank you. So the birds that I showed on these past slides, those were completely different species. They are sisters in the sense that they used to be thousands of years ago a single bird, but because of the isolation that is between them due to the mountain chain, they are now separate species, right? So the ones that I showed are different species. They are considered species by themselves. But it's really common to find certain birds from the Pacific and the Caribbean slope that look different, but they are still considered a single species. Actually, 3 years ago, there was a bird that we used to consider to be one species on one side and another one on the other side of the mountain. But some people started to do some research, and it turned out that they were a single species still. So again, what I was saying at the last question, sometimes the species genetic barriers are still not that close to become a species themselves. So we have now a better understanding of what is a species. So we have a better notion of when the species ends or starts. For this case that I just told of the bird that was considered two different ones that are now considered one, even though that they look different from one side to the other, it is because some people started to record the voice of one bird from the Pacific and started to replay that song to the birds of the Caribbean. If they are separate species, it is supposed that the birds from the Caribbean wouldn't answer to that call because they are different species, so they don't have any reaction to the song from the one of the Pacific. But turned out that the birds from the Caribbean started to react aggressively to the song from the Pacific slope. That means that the genetic barriers are not still close between them because they are still reacting to the voice of the other side of the mountain. So once in maybe 1,000 years, the voices are going to be completely different and they will be considered two different species. But for today, they are still considered one single bird. And we have those cases. There are birds that are already the separate species due to the mountain chain, and there are other cases where they are still single one.
Okay, thank you for your insightful explanation once again, Mr. David. And we got some knowledge about bird diversification in the Costa Rica. Yeah, I have so many notes here. Yeah, from your explanation. Yeah. What I have here is Costa Rica is related to so what can have the appearance like South Sulawesi, yeah, like Indonesia in mega biodiversity, and there is some notes here. Yeah, we can conclude that if the bird if there are complex geography, and then we'll only have rich biodiversity. And one the keyword is bird is very love creature. Yeah. You have a very lovely picture from your presentation, Mr. David. So before I close this panel session, would you like to give us the closing statement of your presentation? Closing statement.
Okay. No, maybe the sentence that would make a summary of everything is that tropical environments with complex geography means that there are going to be thousands of species in a really small place. And I know that at that side of the world in Indonesia, the same happens. If there is a specific place with a very complex geography, that is the place where you might find the biggest amount of species. So we need to understand the extent of the diversity that we have in order to comprehend how we can do conservation projects in order to save a lot of species that might be hidden in all the, let's say, political stuff, because this of being considered two separate species, a single one, or a lot of different species being considered into one, is something that is putting a lot more threat into species, because we might be trying to save more birds than we have an idea of. And I saw here one last question that it says that conversion to agriculture and poaching is a problem for bird diversity. And yes, it is, of course. Birds and endemic birds from a region are only found in that place, and if something is affecting them, it will be a great mess for them. So please study taxonomy, please go ahead and discover new things. We are under a big race to save the planet's diversity.
Okay, thank you. Anyone who has a question, has some question, you can contact David by email. I written in the chat room. Yeah, there is an email and then Instagram account. In the Instagram account, I can see a lot of lovely picture from David. Yeah, from his project. Yeah, you can see the lovely picture there. And then the last one, we have the photo session at the Zoom meeting. To all participants, kindly open your camera and I will count until 3. Okay, please open your camera. We have a photo session in the end of the Zoom meeting. Are you ready? Yeah, still a lot of not on cam. Yeah. Okay, I count until 3. 1, 2, 3. Say cheese. Cheese. Second, 1, 2, 3. The third page, 1, 2, 3. The fourth, 1, 2, 3. And the last page, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We do hope we could meet again, Mr. David. Yeah, in the other times, or you can come to Indonesia and we have to collaborate about bird diversity in South Sulawesi.
I would love to see birds up there.
Okay, we could meet again in the next lecturing session, project and collaboration, and have a nice day, Mr. David. Please give a big applause for Mr. David from Costa Rica. Ladies and gentlemen, and all the below participants, thank you very much for attending our lecturing session today. This is the end of our session, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Give back to Mr. Aswar Rustam.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Syarif Hidayat Amrullah. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as a gesture of gratitude to our beloved speaker, Mr. David Seguera, for his willingness to share his knowledge in this activity, kindly receive the electric certificate that we display on the screen. Okay. We sincerely hope that our department and the last areas natural reserve in Costa Rica can continue to work together and see you at the following activity. And then, ladies and gentlemen, to beloved presenter, participant, and the committee, thank you very much for attending our general lecture today. We appreciate your enthusiastic participant in this event's knowledge expansion. The electronic certificate as a participant will be sent on automatically through email if the participant has filled out the attendance list, which the committee share with the chat room. We want to thank you again for attending our general lecture session today. We will see you at another event. This is the end of the session. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Mr. David.
Thanks a lot for everything.
Thank you, Dad.
Thank you, Isna.
Satu-satunya orang bilang thank you, Dev. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Dev.
Okay, good night.
Good night, Mr. David.
Good night, Mr.
Pura vida.
Is it the
Have a nice
time to
sleep.
sleep right now there?
We're waiting for you in Indonesia.
Have a nice day.
Thank you, Mas David. Keluar Mika, keluar nih. Mbak Devi ini. Dia. Iya, tunggu ya, 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 nak. Tidak ada orang, Kak. Oh.